So, back in July this year, I uploaded a social media post that congratulated SM for receiving an honorary fellowship from the Economic Society of Singapore. The honor was the highest that the society, of which I'm a council member, can grant. In my post, I observed how I differed philosophically from SM. These have to do with different beliefs about the philosophy of public policy, especially as it concerns market efficiency and fair distribution. I used an example he raised in his dialogue about the Certificate of Entitlement or COE system and explained how, by relegating allocation decisions to an impersonal market, he implicitly accepted that such resulting allocations were fair, or as fair as they could potentially be. I noted that there could be a difference between COE allocations based on market prices versus individual needs. So it's valuable at the outset to stress that I do not differ from the government's position on prioritizing public transport. Singapore is a dense urban city, and like all such cities, public transportation is rightly the cornerstone of intra-city commuting. Ministry of Transport, or MOT, efforts should rightly be focused on expanding efficient, affordable, and accessible public transport. This includes addressing our over-congestion issues along certain MRT and LRT lines, including in Sengkang, the constituency that I represent, and as discussed earlier today, and improving cross-island connectivity to reduce commute times, not downplaying the importance of the bus system as a last-mile solution given our hot and humid climate and aging population, and a road system that is more inclusive of greener travel options. I first spoke about Singapore's vehicle quota system, or VQS, and the associated COEs and the Workers' Party motion filed in 2023 on the cost of living crisis. My speech at the time was focused on refining the system as I understood it. And among the most important suggestions I offered was a supply-side change to smooth the annual quota supply across a 10-year cycle, so that what is on offer every month would roughly be the same, and a demand-side one to shift private hire car or PHC bids to the open category E. This would, in my view, contribute to containing COE price increases as well as its fluctuation. Such moves are even more salient today, as this month's Cat A and B Premier cleared eye-watering amounts of 119,000 and 136,000 respectively. Since that time, the ministry has rolled out the cut and fill system, which seeks to balance out year-to-year variations in COE supply. While it has been implemented with less vigor than I would personally have preferred, in the debate at the time, then Minister Chi explained that the government's position was based on the desire to minimize disamenities that would result from introducing too many cars on the road in the short term. I am nevertheless gratified that at least some steps have been taken to manage the feast and famine nature of year-to-year COE pricing. I urge the government to continue to be more aggressive in its cutting from future supply and not be satisfied with mainly moving guaranteed deregistrations. I'm also hopeful that the government will eventually come round to moving PHCs into the quota for Cat E, as it already does with taxis, so that their commercially minded bids do not inadvertently distort demand for non-commercial use. Now, in my speech, I also underscored how the VQS system resulted in our ability to enjoy uncongested streets, especially compared with other global cities such as London or New York, which has, perhaps revealingly, since gone ahead with a road pricing system of their own. It would not be a mischaracterization to state that I believe that the benefits of the system outweigh the costs, and I do not favor its complete repeal. Still, in my speech then, I also alluded to how, while the government contends that private car ownership is a luxury rather than a need, there are certain groups for whom access to a car is somewhat closer to a need than a luxury. Today, I will build on that speech I delivered 2 years ago. I hope to propose yet another refinement, this time not to improve the system's efficiency per se, but its equity. To set the stage, I will first share my view on why certain groups are in greater need for private transport. I will then discuss how the COE system can be further refined to account for not just the ability to pay, but also assess according to needs. So I believe three groups benefit disproportionately from private car ownership: parents of multiple young children, caregivers to elderly parents, especially if one or both suffer from a chronic illness, and those who are disabled. Any parent of a young child, of whom I'm one, will grasp how game-changing it is to be able to directly ferry their kids from, say, one supplementary or tuition class to another, especially if their interests and talents differ, and instructors in schools are located all over the island. Those who have potentially given up their own careers to take care of a parent battling perhaps cancer will appreciate the flexibility that private transport affords as they bring their father or mother to their chemotherapy sessions. And it is a given that those who lack physical mobility due to a disability would benefit enormously from the independence afforded by a car. Importantly, such groups are not unfamiliar to us. We have agencies, the Agency for Integrated Care and SG Enable, to coordinate elderly and disabled care, and an entire ministry, the Ministry of Social and Family Development, whose raison d'etre is to support families. We already have clear definitions for what constitutes a primary caregiver to seniors, who is a parent or guardian of a child, as stipulated in the Young Persons Act, and an MSF-accepted basis for those who are considered disabled in our social policies. What else is common among these groups, however, is that their need for private transportation is more acute than that of the average citizen. They would, accordingly, benefit from financial support that will make a car more accessible to them. Notably, in one specific case, the disabled, we, and I cannot emphasize this enough, already have in place a program, the Disabled Person Scheme, that grants a full waiver of the COE if a disabled person is seeking a vehicle to commute to work. Now, one may argue that this discrimination, if you will, is by design, or rather lack of discrimination, excuse me. Rather than provide targeted support toward car ownership, the government currently provides generalized financial assistance, which can be easily applied toward offsetting the cost of a COE. Money is fungible, and such generality allows each beneficiary household to decide for themselves whether the cash is better spent on transport or any other need. But yet, this government has not historically shied away from choosing targeted support, so long as it felt that there could be potential spillover benefits from directing individual or corporate conduct. That's why our CDC vouchers are targeted, because we wish to not only encourage household consumption via such transfers, but to also direct spending towards supporting our heartland businesses. That's why we grant businesses tax write-offs for qualifying R&D expenditures, so that they devote more resources toward growth-enhancing innovation. That's why MOE directs its financial assistance scheme for low-income households toward educational expenses, such as fees and books, to help educate the next generation and, hopefully, break free from that cycle of poverty. By the same token, targeted support for car ownership can promote positive behaviors, such as children engaging in caregiving for their elderly father or mother, or time-strapped parents deciding to have their second or third child, or those with disabilities feeling sufficiently empowered to enter the workforce. But it is more than that. Such targeted mechanisms can serve as a signal of the values we place as a society on cultural norms such as filial piety, family bonding, and care for the weak and downtrodden. One may say it is hard to adjudicate between different groups with needs, and so it is better not to do so at all, by leaving it to the market. Or you may say, like me, that we should not let the perfect be the enemy of the good and seek a way to help certain groups that we have already identified as more needy. Now, this isn't the first time this House will have debated the merits of enabling greater access to COE for certain groups. In the 14th Parliament, then NCMP Hazel Phua mooted the idea of a COE credits allocation framework, where tradable credits replace the existing price-based system. Certain groups, families with young children, the elderly, the disabled, and those who have served national service, would receive slightly higher allocations in recognition of their greater needs or greater contributions. To blunt the fiscal impact, she suggested a base fee, which is either determined by car engine capacity or as a share of the vehicle's open market value. The proposal's intent is similar to what I am suggesting today, to better level the playing field between the genuine needs of certain households for a private vehicle versus their ability to pay for a COE. It bridges the gap between need and affordability. In that regard, the spirit of the idea is sound. However, Ms. Phua's proposal relies on a non-price system for the initial allocation before subsequently subjecting these credits to market exchange, which introduces additional wrinkles of complexity and opacity to an otherwise straightforward auction-based pricing system. The government's response to that proposal raised similar concerns about how it is complicated and runs the risk of inefficient pricing. But then SMS for Transport Amy Khor also trotted out an old trope that having the government dictate differential credit allocations would be excessively subjective. SM Lee, in his address, had made a similar point, that the market was the most fair and efficient way. Now, while I agree that the Vickery auction, on which the COE is based, is indeed an efficient mechanism, let us not pretend that it is actually fair or neutral. Allowing prices to be dictated by the market simply abstracts from the need by allowing money to adjudicate between competing demands. Those with more money will automatically be able to bid more to secure the limited resource. It is only fair if we believe that the distribution of income and wealth in society is also always fair. Now, what might be a simple way forward? I'll propose what I believe is a cleaner approach toward incorporating the needs of certain groups, which, if I may remind this House, we have already accepted are worth supporting within the existing price-based COE system. This idea is discounts. To be concrete, we may consider a variant of the following. For the disabled, we offer a 100% discount on the COE. This is a full waiver, which is already in place in the form of the Disabled Person Scheme. For parents of 2 or more children, of which at least 2 must be below 14 years, a 10% discount for each additional child beyond the first. Hence, a family of 2 children, aged 4 and 7, would receive a 10% discount, while one with 3 children, aged between 2 and 13, would receive a 20% discount. A family with a 5 and 15-year-old would not receive any discount, nor would single-child families. For primary caregivers of either 2 parents above 80 years of age or 1 parent who suffers from a chronic illness that is in need of regular medical checkups, all of whom must live within the same household, a 10% discount. The discount will apply at the time of purchase. COE prices would still follow market values thereafter. Hence, should the vehicle subsequently be sold, the benefits would remain with the family that qualified for the discount in the first place. What some have speculated, based on the experience of the EV subsidy, that rebates might simply pass on into higher COE prices, this has not been definitively proven. Perhaps more important, the much smaller segment of potential buyers which would qualify for such discounts makes it highly unlikely that they will materially move markets. To ensure that this system caters to genuine needs while keeping the system fiscally sound, we can accompany these with some form of means testing. For example, we may apply the discount to families that earn below the medium income threshold, or instead we may exclude the top quintile of earners from the scheme. Sir, although I focus on the COE, I recognize that this is ultimately an imperfect proxy for road usage, which is the scarce resource that is actually being rationed. The government is moving toward a system where the cost of car ownership will be de-emphasized, while that of road usage will come to the fore. This is distance-based charging, which has already been foreshadowed by the rollout of ERP 2.0. Should COE prices fall alongside distance-based charges, it will certainly address some concerns by some of the groups that I mentioned. But road pricing will bring its own set of fairness considerations. After all, those living further away, such as estates in Punggol or Sengkang, will suddenly be subject to a higher distance charge just to get to work due to the unanticipated change in policy. Now, this is a debate for another day, but I hope that the thoughts I offer today already hint at the importance of not just taking efficiency into consideration while evaluating who has the right to use our roads, but that equity considerations will come to the fore as well.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for his motion and the opportunity to speak today for the third time. COE policies have been debated extensively before in this very chamber. Many ideas have been proposed and debated over the years. I want to take this opportunity to reiterate why we have this system and also to address some of the questions that other members have raised during this week's sittings on the COE. The COE system is neither perfect nor popular. But I'm glad that Associate Professor Lim agrees that there is still a need for a COE system. We do not have enough land for every person or even every household to own a car. If every household owns a car, we will have around 1.5 million private cars on our roads, which is more than 2 times the current car population. We will need far more roads, but today, 12% of our land is already occupied by road. And so any additional land take by roads will come at the expense of other meritorious needs, housing, schools, hospitals, community facilities, things that are good for our people. That is why our approach is to focus on mass public transport and not car ownership. And I'm very glad that Associate Professor Lim agrees with me on this. We let people make their own decisions on whether they want to spend their money on buying a car and therefore bid for a COE. The COE revenues, which are about $4 to $6 billion a year on average, go towards subsidizing public transport, as well as other government expenditures for the good of society, healthcare, education, defense. With COE revenues, we can provide every Singaporean with high quality and affordable public transport. This way, we achieve the greatest good for the greatest number. This is the fairest approach because some people don't want to drive. Some people are unable to drive, and some people don't want to be burdened by a car loan. But everyone can use good public transport to get to where they want to go. Associate Professor Lim argues for a COE system based on needs and concepts of fairness. Other Singaporeans have shared similar perspectives with me, suggesting groups that can be treated specially or be subsidized for car ownership. I sympathize with many of these perspectives, in particular families with young children or those sending elderly parents to medical appointments. It is not easy, I know, navigating public transport with several young kids in tow or with a senior in a wheelchair. I understand that. Even though it is much better now than, say, 10 years ago when the public transport system was not totally barrier-free. It is now. I do not doubt that these families will benefit from a car. As an alternative, some of them use private hire cars or rent a car once in a while when they need it. These options are not perfect substitutes, but they come close and are more affordable than buying a car. I have received many appeals for COE subsidies for such families or as the member proposes, discounts. But whenever we consider this, it is difficult to make the case, because rather than give one family a substantial COE subsidy, whether say 10K, 20K, 30K, the same amount of subsidy can be redistributed to benefit many more families, including those who do not want or who are not able to afford a car. For example, we can give many more families credits to be used for transport services, as we have done with the large family scheme, or to defray other expenditures through cash or with vouchers. It is challenging for the government to allocate COEs based on needs. What appears deserving to one person might not appear fair to another. For example, if we subsidize families with children, how many children? How old should the children be? Or if we allocate based on income, we have to decide whether to do household income or personal income, or whether big households should be more deserving than small families. And then there are the practical considerations. Do we take away the car when the need is gone? All these ideas sound very attractive, but no matter how one draws the line, there will always be people who fall on the wrong side of the line, who believe that they are more deserving. And we will still be here at another parliament sitting, debating at this late hour how each line has been drawn. I understand the concerns over the rising COE prices in recent months. More potential car buyers feel priced out. The government has tried to stabilize the supply. We brought forward some COE quota from the future to flatten the peaks and the troughs of the supply curve. And we are making a one-off injection of up to 20,000 COEs, which we announced in October 2024. In fact, the quarterly COE supply has doubled since 2023. But COE prices have continued to rise because of demand. Electric vehicles, especially those from China, are being brought into Singapore cheaply, and this means more money being put into COE bids. Some people have suggested that PHC companies, private hire car companies, are responsible for driving up COE prices. Less than 10% of bids have been won by car leasing companies this year. Even if we remove all of the PHC bids, the price of the marginal bidders below the clearing price would not be much lower. Should we have a separate COE category for PHCs, or to move them to category E, as the member suggests? Well, a separate category would mean we have to take quota away from Cat A and Cat B and Cat E. How much would be enough? Would it be more than 10% or less than 10%? If more than 10%, there will be fewer COEs for Cat A and Cat B today. If less than 10%, there will be fewer private hire cars to meet customer demand. And then what would happen is that there would be higher PHC fares and higher rentals for drivers. And this will disadvantage Singaporeans who cannot afford a car and who can only rely on private hire cars to get around. Ultimately, we all want to do better for Singapore and Singaporeans. I share the same broader goal as Associate Professor Lim of expanding connectivity for all Singaporeans. Where we differ is in how to achieve that. For this government, we make sure that we deliver the greatest good for the greatest number. We do so by investing heavily in our public transport system. The government spends some $2 billion on operating subsidies to keep our bus and train services running every year. We build new train lines that serve millions of journeys every day. We build covered walkways, upgrade our footpaths, and expand our cycling paths to make first and last mile journeys of public transport commuters more convenient and comfortable. The COE system should therefore be seen in this broader context. A needs-based system for the COE sounds attractive, but in practice, it is subjective, divisive, and benefits too few. The market mechanism is transparent and allows the government to channel COE revenues to the benefit of the wider public. This is not a perfect system, but it's the fairest and most effective way to allocate a scarce resource in Singapore's context. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.